Ma'am, step away from the vehicle.
I'm just entering my residence.
Okay, step back from the keypad for me. Thank you.
At 6:42 p.m., in the gated residential community of Arlington, a marked patrol unit from the Arlington County Police Department stops at the entrance of a private driveway on North Vernon Street. The vehicle's emergency lights are not activated. Body cameras are recording. A black SUV has just pulled up to the security gate of a federally owned residence assigned to a senior official with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The driver steps out briefly to access the keypad. Within seconds, officers exit their cruiser. Step away from the vehicle. Hands visible. Identify yourself. The driver complies. She states her name and position. The officers request identification again. A neighbor observes from across the street. Another patrol unit arrives. The woman being questioned is Dr. Lillian Harper, a Senate-confirmed federal official with documented security clearance and federal credentials. The residence belongs to her. The officers inform her that a suspicious vehicle matching her SUV was reported in the area. Within 12 minutes, a supervisor is contacted. Within 24 hours, internal emails circulate. Within 72 hours, body camera footage is requested by external counsel. What began as a routine patrol stop at a private gate becomes the focal point of a federal civil rights investigation. Administrative leave follows. Union representation is retained. Prosecutors later file charges related to misconduct under color of law. This case is not defined by raised voices or physical force. It is defined by documentation, dispatch logs, policy manuals, complaint histories, and recorded commands delivered at a homeowner's gate. By the time the footage becomes public, careers have ended, and prison sentences are pending. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. I was told this channel wouldn't reach 1,000 subscribers, but stories like this deserve to be heard. Your support helps bring these cases to light and proves that these stories matter. At 6:42 p.m., a marked patrol vehicle from the Arlington County Police Department slows near a gated residence on North Vernon Street in Arlington. A black SUV is stopped at the keypad entrance of the property. The driver steps out briefly to enter the access code. An officer exits the patrol unit. "Ma'am, step back from the keypad." The driver replies, "This is my residence." "We'll determine that." A second patrol unit is requested before identification is verified. Body cameras are recording from the moment officers leave their vehicle. The arrival of the second unit shifts the encounter from a routine inquiry to a coordinated detention. At that point, the interaction becomes documented as an investigative stop rather than a casual contact. That arrival marks the point of no return. The driver is Dr. Lillian Harper, a Senate-confirmed senior official with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She has served in federal housing policy for 18 years and holds high-level security clearance. The residence behind the gate is assigned to her through federal housing protocols tied to her position. She presents federal credentials within minutes of the initial command. Despite this, the stop continues. Officers state that a suspicious vehicle matching the SUV had been reported in the neighborhood. The report does not include allegations of a crime. Dispatch logs later confirm that the call referenced a vehicle unfamiliar to residents. No description of unlawful conduct is recorded in the initial entry. Dr. Harper provides her driver's license and federal identification. The primary officer, Daniel Kessler, reviews the documents but continues questioning. His body camera records the exchange. The secondary officer, Trent Molina, stands near the patrol vehicle. His body camera captures silence during the moment credentials are presented. Within minutes, Officer Kessler radios, "Possible unauthorized entry at federal residence." The phrasing elevates the incident classification. Dispatch timestamps show that this escalation occurs after identification has already been shown. A supervisor is notified but does not immediately respond to the scene. The core conflict begins to take shape in these minutes. Authority confronts documented identity. Discretion confronts written policy. Local enforcement authority intersects with federal institutional status. Department policy for investigative stops requires reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. The dispatch report does not specify criminal conduct. The only articulated basis is unfamiliarity reported by a third party. The stop continues beyond credential verification, extending the duration of detention. A neighbor begins recording on a mobile phone. The neighbor states, "She lives here." Officer Kessler instructs the neighbor to step back. That recording later becomes supplemental evidence. Once third-party documentation enters the record, the encounter transitions from internal review to potential external scrutiny. Dr. Harper is not placed in handcuffs. No physical force is used. However, she is prevented from accessing her property while officers verify her identity through internal channels. The detention lasts approximately 20 minutes. Sergeant Mark Rollins, a 17-year veteran supervisor, arrives after the primary questioning has concluded. By then, the key decisions have already been made. Sergeant Rollins reviews the situation briefly. He approves the preliminary incident narrative drafted by Officer Kessler before personally reviewing all body camera footage. That approval becomes relevant weeks later when discrepancies emerge between the written report and recorded audio. The central incident does not involve physical injury. It involves decision thresholds. The decision to initiate contact. The decision to escalate classification. The decision to continue detention after documentation is presented. The decision to delay supervisory intervention. The event triggers a formal complaint within 24 hours. Federal counsel representing Dr. Harper requests preservation of all digital evidence, including body camera footage, dispatch audio, patrol GPS logs, and internal communications. Preservation orders prevent deletion under routine retention schedules. Why does the incident matter beyond the individuals involved? First, it tests the limits of discretionary policing within an affluent, federally monitored residential zone. The neighborhood includes multiple properties assigned to federal officials. Local officers retain jurisdiction, but coordination protocols exist for properties tied to federal occupancy. Those protocols are not immediately referenced during the stop. Second, the case raises documented questions about racial profiling in routine stops. Officer Kessler had received prior commendations for proactive policing. Internal records show 2 prior informal bias complaints, neither sustained. Those complaints involved discretionary vehicle stops categorized as legally justified but lacking corroborated criminal activity. Third, the case demonstrates the operational intersection between local law enforcement and federal authority. A Senate-confirmed official does not possess immunity from local policing. However, established identification procedures require verification before escalation. The sequence in this case reverses that order. Fourth, the case examines misuse of police authority absent physical force. Detention authority, even without handcuffs, carries legal weight. Extending that detention beyond objective justification becomes central to later legal analysis. The broader institutional issue extends beyond a single stop. Internal data later reviewed by independent auditors show a pattern of suspicious vehicle calls disproportionately concentrated in neighborhoods with demographic shifts. The phrase, vehicle unfamiliar to residents, appears repeatedly in dispatch logs over a 2-year period. Most of those calls do not result in citations or arrests. Few trigger supervisory review. The department's internal discipline system categorizes such stops as discretionary encounters unless a complaint is filed. Without formal complaints, patterns remain unexamined collectively. Each incident is evaluated in isolation. Supervisory delay also emerges as a structural blind spot. Policy allows supervisors discretion in responding physically to scenes. In this case, Sergeant Rollins chose to monitor by radio before arriving. By the time he appeared on scene, the detention had already occurred. Intervention opportunity had narrowed. When body camera footage is reviewed weeks later by federal civil rights investigators, the timeline becomes central. The footage shows that federal credentials were visible before escalation language was transmitted. It shows that identity confirmation occurred verbally before the second unit's arrival. It documents the precise tone and sequence of commands. Federal prosecutors evaluate whether the continued detention constituted deprivation of rights under color of law. The absence of physical force does not remove the possibility of criminal liability. The key question becomes whether the officers knowingly extended detention without objective legal basis. Officer Kessler is later charged under federal civil rights statutes. Officer Molina faces lesser administrative charges tied to failure to intervene. Sergeant Rollins is investigated for report approval discrepancies. Careers that had spanned years end within months. Pension eligibility is affected. Union representation challenges procedural aspects of the investigation but does not dispute the authenticity of body camera footage. The case concludes with plea agreements for one officer and trial proceedings for another. Policy changes follow within the department, including mandatory supervisor presence for disputed identity stops and required documentation of objective suspicion criteria. The encounter began at a residential gate. It ended in federal court. The documentation, dispatch timestamps, body camera recordings, identification credentials, complaint history, forms the backbone of the case. No physical injury occurred. No weapons were drawn. The legal consequences arose from decisions measured in minutes. Authority confronted documented identity. Discretion intersected with policy limits. Institutional loyalty was tested against legal accountability. The record remains archived in federal filings and departmental reform documents. The initial command, "Step back from the keypad," remains the first entry in a chain of documented events that extended far beyond a single driveway in Arlington. Internal records from the Arlington County Police Department show 3 prior stops conducted by Officer Daniel Kessler over a 4-year period involving suspicious vehicle reports in majority black residential neighborhoods in Arlington. Each stop shared common features. The initiating factor was a civilian call describing a vehicle that did not appear to belong. No traffic violation or criminal activity was observed prior to engagement. The driver was detained for identity verification despite immediate compliance. The stop concluded without citation, arrest, or documented criminal finding. In each instance, a complaint was filed alleging racial profiling. The Internal Affairs Division reviewed body camera footage and incident reports. All 3 cases were classified as procedurally sound. No sustained discipline was issued. No written reprimand appears in the officer's personnel file. Review memoranda indicate that supervisors focus primarily on whether officers articulated a reasonable suspicion in their written reports. The analysis did not include demographic comparison of stops, geographic pattern mapping, or examination of escalation language used during the encounters. All 3 complaints were reviewed internally. There was no referral to an external oversight board, civilian review commission, or independent prosecutor. The review process followed standard departmental procedure. Complaint intake. Body camera review. Officer interview. Supervisory conclusion. Closure memorandum. In none of the cases was retraining mandated. No bias awareness review was assigned. No monitoring period was implemented. Internal documentation shows that the department relied on the presence of recorded compliance with formal procedure, identifying oneself, issuing commands, documenting suspicion, as the basis for clearing the officer. The substance of the suspicion itself was not independently tested. When the 3 prior incidents are viewed collectively, a consistent operational pattern emerges. Discretionary stops tied to ambiguous suspicion. Escalation occurring before identity verification. Heavy reliance on neighborhood caller descriptions without independent corroboration. Dispatch transcripts from those earlier cases show language such as "vehicle seems out of place" and "driver doesn't match neighborhood." These descriptors were accepted as sufficient basis to initiate contact. In each event, officers issued commands before asking neutral clarifying questions. Identity verification occurred after physical positioning and directive language were established. The gate incident followed the same sequence. Several systemic intervention opportunities were not triggered. The department did not maintain a stop-level database categorizing interactions by race in discretionary, non-traffic stops. Without aggregated data, patterns were not flagged automatically. No independent bias audit reviewed the officer's stop history. Complaints were evaluated in isolation rather than comparatively. Departmental policy did not require mandatory supervisory arrival when identity disputes arose during residential stops. Escalation thresholds were undefined. By the time the gate incident occurred, no structural safeguard existed to interrupt the established pattern. This reconstruction aligns dispatch logs, GPS data, body camera timestamps, and resident security logs. 6:39 p.m., the black SUV registered to Dr. Lillian Harper enters North Vernon Street. Patrol vehicle GPS confirms presence 2 blocks south. 6:42 p.m., patrol observes the SUV stopped at a gated driveway assigned to a federally owned residence. No traffic violation recorded. 6:43 p.m., officers exit cruiser. Body camera activation confirmed. 6:44 p.m., first command issued, step away from the vehicle. No inquiry is made regarding residency status before command. 6:45 p.m., driver verbally states name and federal position. Officers request physical identification. 6:47 p.m., second unit requested. Dispatch log references, possible unauthorized access attempt. No confirmation with property registry initiated at this point. 6:50 p.m., federal identification card physically presented. Officer maintains directive posture while reviewing credentials. 6:54 p.m., supervisor notified by radio. No on-scene arrival before interaction concludes. 7:02 p.m., interaction ends. Officers depart without citation or arrest. Subsequent administrative timeline. Next day, 9:15 a.m., formal complaint filed through departmental portal. Day 3, body camera footage formally requested by federal counsel representing Dr. Harper. Week 4, federal civil rights inquiry initiated following review of preliminary footage and dispatch language. Month 8, indictments announced related to misconduct under color of law and falsification in reporting sequence. Each escalation point corresponds to a decision node: command before inquiry, secondary unit request before verification, supervisory delay, and report framing. Confirmed Senate confirmed appointment and active clearance. Time-stamped body camera footage shows card presented at 6:50 p.m. Security company gate log verifies authorized entry code assigned to Dr. Harper. Log entry corresponds to 6:44 p.m. keypad access attempt. Confirm proximity and lack of prior call assignment at time of observation. Captures command first approach. Documents the sequence of verbal identification preceding physical ID review. Show that the initial radio communication referenced suspicious vehicle without description of criminal conduct. Within 24 hours, supervisory staff circulated internal discussion noting optics concerns prior to formal review. External camera across the street shows compliant posture of Dr. Harper during interaction. Confirms that Dr. Harper had resided at the address for over a year. States that officers did not ask clarifying residency questions before issuing commands. Confirms active, authorized access linked to Dr. Harper's credentials. Documents 3 prior stops categorized as procedurally sound. Reveal that prior analyses focused solely on procedural articulation rather than contextual pattern. Outlines argument that escalation occurred absent reasonable suspicion supported by objective facts. The gate incident aligns operationally with prior discretionary stops. The sequence, command, reinforcement, verification, was consistent with documented behavior patterns. Prior complaints did not trigger structural oversight. No demographic analysis or bias audit interrupted the trend. Evidence categories reinforce one central finding: escalation decisions were made before verification steps were completed. The timeline demonstrates how a routine observation transformed into a documented detention. The evidence shows how documentation, rather than force, became the central issue. By month 8, indictments formalized what internal reviews had previously categorized as compliant procedure. The distinction between written policy adherence and practical application became the focus of legal scrutiny. The case illustrates how patterns are not defined by single events, but by repeated decision sequences that go uncorrected until external intervention occurs. At 9:12 a.m. the morning after the 6:42 p.m. gate encounter, the Arlington County Police Department initiated a supervisory review classified as a Level 2 conduct assessment. Officers Daniel Kessler and Trent Molina were placed on paid administrative leave pending internal investigation. Their service weapons were collected in accordance with departmental protocol for cases involving potential civil rights violations. Body camera footage was secured under digital evidence hold. The department's first public statement was released at 3:40 p.m. that same day. It stated that officers responded to a report of a suspicious vehicle, and that standard procedure was followed. No reference was made to the homeowner's federal position, the length of the detention, or the delay in identity verification. The statement did not include timestamps or reference supervisory involvement. Internally, supervisors requested dispatch logs, CAD reports, and the body-worn camera footage for review. An internal memorandum circulated within 48 hours noting a verification delay exceeding standard ID confirmation threshold. That memo did not accompany the public release. 4 days later, edited body camera footage surfaced through legal counsel representing Dr. Lillian Harper, a Senate-confirmed official with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The footage showed Dr. Harper presenting federal identification within minutes of the initial command. It also showed officers requesting backup prior to confirming residency. Within 24 hours of public dissemination, the department revised its statement. The updated release acknowledged that review of video evidence indicates procedural deviations. It removed the earlier claim that standard procedure was followed. The county executive requested appointment of an independent prosecutor. A special counsel from outside Virginia was assigned to evaluate potential criminal violations under federal civil rights statutes. The internal review was converted into a parallel administrative and criminal inquiry. Within 2 weeks, the department announced department-wide bias awareness and procedural retraining. A diversity training schedule was published for all sworn officers. Additionally, leadership promised a full audit of discretionary stop policies, specifically those involving suspicious vehicle calls in residential zones. Public communications emphasized reform initiatives. Community listening sessions were scheduled. Policy review committees were announced. However, internal emails later revealed that the bias training curriculum had been under development prior to the incident and was not initiated solely in response to this case. The internal memo acknowledging a verification delay documented that officers waited approximately 6 minutes after ID presentation before confirming residency through dispatch. That memo also noted that departmental policy requires immediate verification upon credible identification. The revised public statement acknowledged procedural concerns but did not specify the timeline gap. No public release detailed the 6-minute delay or explained why a second patrol unit was requested before ID verification. The discrepancy between internal acknowledgement and public summary became a focal point during subsequent federal proceedings. Federal prosecutors filed charges under civil rights statutes alleging deprivation of rights under color of law. The indictment referenced body camera timestamps, dispatch communications, and supervisory delay. Officer Trent Molina entered a plea agreement, admitting to participation in procedural escalation despite awareness of identification presented. In exchange for cooperation, sentencing recommendations were reduced. Officer Daniel Kessler proceeded to trial. Prosecutors argued that the escalation occurred after clear verification opportunities. The defense argued reasonable suspicion based on dispatch information. The jury returned a guilty verdict on civil rights violations tied to unlawful detention. Both officers were terminated following administrative hearings. Termination letters cited policy violations, conduct unbecoming an officer, and failure to follow ID verification procedures. Pension eligibility was reviewed under departmental misconduct clauses. Kessler's pension benefits were partially forfeited following conviction. Supervisory personnel received formal reprimands but were not criminally charged. The department cited lack of direct on-scene command as the basis for administrative discipline rather than termination. Dr. Harper filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the county and individual officers. The complaint referenced constitutional violations, documented delays, and pattern of behavior evidence from prior discretionary stops. The case concluded in a settlement. Monetary compensation terms were undisclosed under agreement conditions. The settlement required publication of revised ID verification policies and mandated independent auditing for 2 years. The department instituted a mandatory supervisor arrival requirement when a resident presents verifiable identification yet detention continues beyond 3 minutes. A bias audit requirement was codified, mandating quarterly demographic review of discretionary stops. Additionally, body camera activation audits were implemented to ensure continuous recording during all ID disputes. Records show prior complaints against Officer Kessler involving suspicious vehicle detentions. None triggered retraining or escalation review. It remains unclear why those complaints did not meet intervention thresholds. Public reporting of discretionary stop demographics increased, yet raw datasets remain partially redacted. Questions remain regarding transparency in stop classification and reporting consistency. Return to 6:42 p.m. The SUV stops at the gate. The first command is issued: step away from the vehicle. Policy requires verification upon presentation of credible identification. Body camera footage confirms ID was presented within minutes. Dispatch logs confirm residency verification was available through database query. The documented gap between protocol and action is 6 minutes. During that interval, a second unit was requested. Supervisory notification was delayed. Identification was visible but unconfirmed. Oversight mechanisms existed: internal review processes, complaint tracking, supervisory thresholds. None activated prior to this incident. After documentation became public, administrative leave was imposed. Criminal prosecution followed. Terminations occurred. Sentences were handed down. Policy amendments were enacted. The opening moment at 6:42 p.m. marks the start of a recorded sequence that ended with federal conviction, career termination, and mandatory reform measures. Begin with body camera timestamp overlay. Commands issued before identity confirmed. Withhold federal role until later module. Dr. Harper's 18-year federal career. Senate confirmation record. Jurisdiction of Arlington County PD, clarify limits between local enforcement and federal residency status. Diagram chain of command, patrol officer field supervisor command staff county executive oversight. Identify discretionary thresholds and complaint review mechanisms. 2-column reconstruction, left column, actual actions taken minute by minute, right column, departmental policy requirement at each minute marker. Frame-by-frame video analysis. Compare verbal commands to dispatch timestamps. Chronological reconstruction of internal email chains. Overlay prior complaints against demographic stop data. Examine disciplinary outcomes versus frequency of discretionary detentions. Side-by-side comparison, public statements versus internal memoranda, training announcements versus documented policy drafts. Quote indictment language referencing deprivation of rights. Summarize plea agreement terms. Outline sentencing structure. List implemented reforms. Note supervisory outcomes. Identify oversight mechanisms still pending independent review. Return visually and narratively to the gate. Replay first recorded command. Present documented 6-minute delay. State final outcomes: termination, conviction, prison sentence, settlement, policy revision. No commentary. Only recorded sequence, verified evidence, and documented institutional action. Please subscribe to the channel and enable notifications so you don't miss future stories, updates, and in-depth discussions. Thank you for being part of this platform dedicated to examining the facts and pursuing accountability. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.